Ability of human rights and commit itself to the protection of all human beings against discrimination and violence, in particular against stigmatization and discrimination related to sexual orientation and gender identity. We call on all states to support the renewal of the mandate of the independent expert on SOGI and to continue to cooperate with him. The report before us demonstrates that LGBT persons are disproportionately affected by displacement, such as conflict, violence, persecution, repression, disasters, and climate-linked crises. LGBT persons who are forcibly displaced are not only confronted with a higher risk of violence and exclusion, but also face structural obstacles and discriminatory practices which block their access to protection, legal recognition, support services and essential services. Mr. Independent Experts, how does the lack of data and legal recognition contribute to the persistent invisibility of displaced LGBT persons, and what measures can governments and humanitarians take to better protect LGBT persons in situations of displacement? Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU and thanks the independent expert for his presentation and report. We take this opportunity to express our continued support for the important work of the independent expert and our full support for the renewal of the independent expert's mandate at this session of the Human Rights Council. The universal nature of human rights cannot be fulfilled without respecting the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons. We note with concern that the discrimination and harassment of LGBTIQ+ persons can be both a driving factor behind forced displacement and can exacerbate the risk of violence, exclusion and neglect for persons experiencing forced displacement. We echo the report's finding that LGBTIQ+ persons experience multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination in the context of forced displacement, compounded by their ethnicity or migrant status. Ireland condemns all laws and practices that discriminate against LGBTIQ+ persons. We note with particular concern that a number of states continue to apply the death penalty for consenting same-sex relations between adults. We urge these states to repeal such provisions as a matter of urgency. We are concerned by the political instrumentalization of anti-LGBTIQ+ rhetoric worldwide, which increases polarization and fosters misunderstanding about the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons. Mr. Independent Expert, in our efforts to counter such political instrumentalization, how can we ensure that an intersectional approach is taken? I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to UN Women.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. UN Women welcomes the report of the independent expert and commends the mandate's continued attention to the lived realities of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender diverse and intersex persons, particularly in situations of forced displacement. We are deeply concerned by the compounded risk of violence and exclusion faced by LGBTQI+ persons at all stages of displacement and related impunity. For women, gender diverse persons and others facing intersecting discrimination, these concerns are exacerbated, including by family rejection, forced marriage, sexual violence, barriers to asylum, denial of essential services including healthcare and safe housing. This report makes clear that the erosion of protection frameworks, discriminatory laws, politicized rhetoric are not only violations of rights but drivers of displacement, alongside conflict, persecution, repression, disaster and climate-related risks. UN Women joins the call for an inclusive rights-based approach that centers the voices and agencies of affected communities. We underscore the need for intersectional, gender-responsive protection systems and humanitarian responses. Independent expert, what is your advice to the UN system to ensure it plays its role in promoting and protecting rights of LGBTQI+ persons, including at the Human Rights Council? UN Women remains a committed partner to the mandate of your office. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand thanks the independent expert for his insightful thematic report, which represents an important and timely perspective on the issue of forced displacement. Thailand places great importance on the protection and promotion of human rights of all individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. No one should be forced to flee their home, especially not on the basis of who they are or whom they love. Thailand is currently considering a bid to host World Pride 2030, reflecting our continued efforts to foster inclusion and respect for LGBT persons. As one of the most welcoming countries for LGBT communities, we remain committed to advancing equality. The recent adoption of the marriage equality law stands as a clear testament to this progress. In this context, we would welcome the experts' view on how the right to family reunification can be more effectively upheld and implemented for LGBT persons affected by forced displacement, including in relation to their partners, spouses, and chosen family. I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cambodia thanks the independent expert for his comprehensive report. We take note of the issues forcibly displaced LGBT persons face across all stages of displacement and the list of recommendations states should take to protect them. We also appreciate the significant role civil society and international organizations play in pushing for protections against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientations and gender identity. On this matter, Cambodia acknowledged that we have some limitation on our legal framework in recognizing and protecting LGBT persons. However, we would like to underscore that Cambodia is among the few countries in the world that never criminalize sexual orientations or gender identity. Positive progress is underway, as Cambodia have been working to raise awareness on the issues through various measures, such as Cambodia's acceptance of relevant UPR recommendation in 2019, the welcoming of independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identities visit to the country in 2023, the inclusion of LGBT matters in national policies and action plans, the integration of LGBT issues in school and high-level leaders' public call for avoidance of discrimination against a group. Respected expert, in the context of humanitarian aid cut and the extra resource needed to protect forcibly displaced LGBT persons, our question is how could we motivate and support hosting states in their protection against forcibly displaced LGBT persons? I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Ukraine.
Mr. President, we welcome the independent experts' timely report on the protection of LGBTQ+ persons in situation of forced displacement and thank him for highlighting these critical concerns. Ukraine remains unwavering in its commitment to a future where every person can fully exercise their human rights regardless of sexual orientation or gender equality or gender identity. Our government has approved a roadmap for EU accession, which includes steps to adoption of a law determining the legal status of registered partnerships, as well as anti-discrimination legislation. Ukrainian Parliament is also advancing a bill expanding hate crime and discrimination laws to explicitly cover sexual orientation and gender identity. The ongoing Russian war continues to devastate all Ukrainians. LGBTQ+ persons, especially in occupied territories, face severe human rights violations, torture, unlawful detention, abuse driven by anti-LGBTQ+ motives. Ukraine reaffirms its resolve to enhance protection and equality for LGBTQ+ persons, particularly those displaced by armed conflict. We look forward to collaborating with the independent expert and the international community to ensure that every individual, regardless of identity or displacement, can live freely and with dignity. I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Portugal commends the work of the independent expert and welcomes his latest report on protection of LGBTI+ persons in context of forced displacement. Mr. Independent Expert, Portugal reaffirms its commitment to protecting and fulfilling the human rights of persons of diverse sexual orientation and gender identities. We are firmly opposed to all forms of discrimination, violence and hate speech, online and offline, based on real or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. We remain profoundly concerned by the widespread persecution of LGBTI+ persons, which continues to drive their displacement. Portugal strongly condemns the continued use of the death penalty against individuals based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. As emphasized in your report, the death penalty remains in place in approximately 12 countries, while around 65 more continue to criminalize consensual same-sex relations. Portugal is implementing its national action plan to combat discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity and expression and sex characteristics 2018-2030, aimed at promoting legal protection and advancing inclusive policies both domestically and internationally. Mr. Independent Expert, how can host countries better identify and respond to specific protection needs for LGBTI+ persons during asylum procedures? Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. South Africa welcomes the report of the independent report. LGBT persons face increased vulnerability due to the growing anti-LGBT and anti-migrant sentiment globally. This has exacerbated discriminatory patterns and systemic violence leveled at LGBT persons, not only in their countries of origin, but also during transit and in destination countries. South Africa acknowledges the unique challenges faced by LGBT refugees and asylum seekers, who too often encounter discrimination, violence and xenophobia. Our constitution and legislation, such as the 1998 Refugees Act, allow for the granting of asylum based on sexual orientation, and our vibrant civil society plays a critical role in providing protection, legal assistance and advocacy for displaced LGBT persons. Vice President, South Africa reaffirms its commitment to the protection and promotion of the rights of LGBT persons. We equally recognize that LGBT persons globally continue to face increased discrimination and in some cases persecution and violence, often forcing them to flee their countries of origin in search of a safe life. We call on all states to uphold their international obligations and work as a collective to ensure that no human being is forced to choose between their identity and their safety.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Austria.
Mr. Vice President, Austria aligns with the EU statement and supports the statement of the Group of Friends on Zoji. We thank the independent expert for his report on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in relation to forced displacement and providing important recommendations for states in this regard. As we have a very active civil society in Austria, we also welcome the recognition of the important role civil society can play in support of states to implement these recommendations. At the same time, we are very concerned by the global surge in exclusionary rhetoric and violence targeting persons for being perceived as different. We are particularly worried to see the level of aggression rise and the readiness to act on it. We strongly condemn discriminatory laws, policies and practices, as well as all forms of discrimination and harassment of LGBTI persons. We reject all forms of incitement to violence, online and offline. We believe the mandate of the independent expert has an important role in fostering dialogue, which is crucial to help overcome fears and misconceptions and to improve the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights by all LGBTI persons. We therefore call on all states to support the extension of the mandate during this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Vice President. Switzerland would like to thank the independent expert for his report. The report states that LGBT people are disproportionately affected by the drivers of forced displacement, such as conflict, violence, persecution, repression and climate crisis. They continue to be targeted, persecuted and forced to flee just because of who they are. No one should suffer violence or discrimination because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Everyone has the right to dignity and protection, and so we call on states to stop criminalising LGBT persons and to take measures which take into consideration the specific protection needs of LGBT people who have been forcibly displaced. In Switzerland, some of our cantons have taken specific protection measures for LGBT persons who are seeking asylum. We're particularly worried about using detention, which exposes LGBT persons to a heightened risk of psychological harm, violence and isolation. In some cases, it is tantamount to torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment. Lastly, we reiterate our full support to the independent expert's mandate. We commend you on your work, sir. Independent expert, what tips can you give us to combat stigmatising discourse which makes LGBT people who have been forced to flee their countries even more vulnerable? Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Uruguay.
Gracias, señor vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice President. Uruguay would like to thank the independent expert for presenting his report. There is a high rate of discrimination and violence on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity around the world, so we'd like to underscore that this mandate's work is vital for supporting countries as they try to combat discrimination and violence and ensure that LGBT persons and gender diverse persons can enjoy equality. We agree that it's states' obligation to protect, respect and enforce the rights of all persons, and so in this regard we'd like to highlight that in Uruguay the rights of migrants, refugees and asylum seekers are guaranteed in law and policies with specific actions to ensure their access to education, health, culture and work inter alia. We'd like to thank the expert for his recommendations, including those to ensure that there are safe and legal avenues for seeking asylum and ensure that refugee assessment procedures and registration procedures take into consideration the specific needs based on sexual orientation and gender identity and our gender identity. And lastly, we would like to say that we will be supporting a 3-year renewal of this mandate, and we encourage all other member states of the Council to do the same. Thank you very much.
I give the floor to Cuba.
Vice President. Cuba supports the mandate of the independent expert on this subject. The Cuban state rejects all forms of discrimination and is committed to ensuring that all persons can enjoy the same treatment and protection and enjoy the same rights without any discrimination on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Our country continues to take significant strides to protecting the members of the LGBTQI+ community in order to protect them from any form of violence. We've newly adopted a family code through a popular referendum, and this has brought to fruition a very important fundamental rights standard for the LGBTI community, including recognition of same-sex marriage. Our constitution explicitly prohibits discrimination on any grounds and places human dignity at the centre of our system. Sexual education ensures that there is a free choice to choose one's sexual orientation and gender identity. Nevertheless, there continues to be stereotypes, prejudice and hostile behaviour towards persons from this community. Institutional work and civil society organisations are combating the persistent stereotypes affecting these people. Thank you.
The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Vice President. We've taken note of the reference in the independent experts' report to Venezuela. We encourage you to get more documents from different sources so that you can corroborate your statements. And so you must ensure that you stick to the Code of Conduct for Special Procedures. Please go through the reports of certain special procedures mandate holders who have analysed the negative effect of unilateral coercive measures on Venezuela and have restricted the enjoyment of human rights, including the right to health. Just to give you an idea, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States was blocking medicine from reaching us, in line with Article 19 of our Constitution, nonetheless, which states that the state will progressively and on a non-discriminatory basis ensure that everyone can enjoy all their rights, including the right to health and the supply of medicines to all persons, including to the LGBTI community. As a result, as part of our master plan, the Pan American Health Organization provided antiretroviral treatment to Venezuela last August, which has been distributed to the respective population. Thank you very much, Vice President.
Thank you. I have been informed that the delegation of Mauritius has requested to take the floor after the list of speakers for this dialogue had closed. If there is no objection and in accordance with the established practice, I will allow the delegation to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. We really appreciate your indulgence. Mauritius expresses its appreciation to the independent expert for the presentation of his report. Mauritius wishes to highlight that in line with its laws, access to medical treatment and psychological support are available in public hospitals and private health institutions, irrespective of the sex or sexual orientation of a person. Under the Workers' Rights Act, discrimination on the ground of sex, sexual orientation and gender is prohibited. Transgender persons who petition to the Attorney General to change their first names to align with their gender after transitioning have been allowed to do so, and this is reflected in their identity documents. As has been highlighted in the report of Mauritius to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, I quote, different measures have been taken for the inclusion of the LGBTQ in the society inter alia by A, distribution of condoms and condom-compatible lubricant, B, pre-exposure PrEP since 2018, and C, hormonal therapy is available once weekly to trans people in all regional hospitals since 2019, and they are followed by an endocrinologist, unquote. To conclude, we wish to state that in line with our Constitution, no individual shall be discriminated on the basis of race, place of origin, political opinions, creed or sex. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We will now turn to the list of speakers of national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. Now I give the floor to the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. It's a video statement.
The Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, as the country's NHRI and Gender Abroad, welcomes the report of the independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, with a particular focus on forced displacement. It is our duty to amplify the voices of the unheard, to bring to light the realities of those who face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, and to call on states to fulfill their human rights obligations. In the Philippines, LGBTQIA persons continue to be denied explicit legal protection from discrimination. The bill seeking to protect persons of diverse OGSC has been pending in Congress for 25 years. This legal gap has a disproportionate impact on LGBTQIA persons who are displaced or at risk of forced displacement, whether due to conflict, disaster, or other emergencies. Such situations heighten their vulnerability, diminish their visibility, and further limit their access to protection and assistance. The Commission reiterates that protection from discrimination must be comprehensive, universal, and inclusive. We urge the Philippine government to pass the Social Equality Bill and enact it into law without further delay. The right to dignity, participation, and protection must be guaranteed to all, especially to those rendered most at risk in times of crisis.
The sound quality of this statement was insufficient for interpretation. Thank you for your understanding.
Now I give the floor to the Ombudsperson of Colombia.
The Ombudsman's Office of Colombia underscores how important this report on protection from violence and discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity in the context of enforced displacement is. In Colombia, hate-based violence against the Soji diverse community has been increasing, and it's forcing people to flee their homes because of threats, stigma, sexual violence, or being excluded from the family or community. Last year, our office supported over 880 victims of hate-based violence. To date this year, we have registered the murders of over 30 persons from the Soji diverse community. 12 of the victims were trans women and 2 trans men. Trans people continue to face multiple forms of exclusion, discrimination, concealment and violence, which means that every day they're struggling to see if they will survive to the next. It's no exaggeration to state that their lives are just a mix of pain, anxiety, and the lack of basic guarantees. Many of them are fighting to get their own name and identity, but all too often it's just struck off and they lose what they've most fought for, to be recognised as political subjects. We'd like to make an urgent appeal for states to follow the recommendations made in the report. It's our duty to promote a culture of respect and guaranteeing rights for persons from the Soji diverse community. I thank you.
Now I give the floor to ILGA World.
Mr. Vice President, this statement is supported by 1,200 NGOs from 167 states and territories across the world. In every region of the world, violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity persists. In 2016, the UN Human Rights Council took definitive action to systematically address this abuse, creating independent experts on SOGI. Since then, mandate holders have sent over 171 communications documenting allegations of violations and carry out 10 country visits. This mandate has welcomed progress and identified best practice from all regions while engaging in constructive dialogue and assisting states to implement international human rights standards as well as collaborating with UN mechanisms. A decision by Council members to renew this mandate would send a clear message that violence and discrimination against people of diverse sexual orientation and gender identity cannot be tolerated. It would reaffirm that specific attention continues to be crucial to address this human rights violation and ensure that LGBT people are in fact free and equal in dignity and rights. We urge the Council to ensure we continue building a world where everyone can live free from violence and discrimination. I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Frontline AIDS Limited.
Thank you, members of the Council. With each new report, we're reminded again of the neglect, contempt, and outright hatred that members of the LGBT community face. For some of you, it will not matter how many times we beg, plead, shout, or demand, these issues continue to exist. We see this every day in our work at Frontline AIDS, whether through our Rapid Response Fund or our Human Rights Monitoring tool, REACT. Maybe you hear LGBT rights and you stop paying attention. You don't hear that in displacement contexts, queer people face disproportionate risks of forced labor, physical and sexual violence, including rape by state and non-state actors. You ignore the evidence that LGBT people living with HIV are often the first to be displaced during crises, where lack of medication may force people to flee, or when access to HIV treatment is denied in detention centers or temporary shelters, or that all of these issues and harms are compounded for trans people, especially where their documentation does not match their gender identity. And yet, all of these issues affect your country's citizens, and ignoring them will only further inequality and negatively impact your health and economic outcomes. But this is the trade-off for political power and a rise in populism and far-right ideals that seek to oppress, exclude and repeal the rights of LGBT people. We call for the renewal of the SOGI mandate and for all states to uphold the rights and safety and dignity of LGBT people. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to COC Netherlands.
Mr. Vice President, this statement is delivered in consultation with a group of 16 trans activists from the Global South and East. In recent years, regressive policies have been accelerating displacement. So-called LGBT propaganda laws and pride bans were passed in Hungary, Russia and Kyrgyzstan. Georgia proposed anti-trans constitutional amendments and banned access to trans-specific health care. Russia, Bulgaria, Georgia and Hungary banned legal gender recognition. Turkey moved to criminalize LGBT expression. And trans people's right to non-discrimination in the United Kingdom stands restricted following a Supreme Court ruling on the definition of woman. Displaced trans people often face profound challenges with belonging in the country of destination, including mental health crisis, being excluded from legal recognition processes, and access to trans-specific health care. Therefore, prioritizing the human rights of trans people remains important, including in mechanisms such as the UPR. As a trans person in Bulgaria, I live in constant fear of discrimination and violence daily. Documents that do not reflect my identity undermine my sense of security, dignity, and opportunities as a citizen. This constant anxiety is taking a serious toll on my mental well-being. If I leave my home, it should be by choice and not due to repressions. Independent expert, thank you for your report. We ask you, how do you plan to follow up on the implementation of your recommendations and involve IOM, UNHCR, and other UN actors? Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Asia Pacific Transgender Network.
Thank you, Vice President. My name is Alien and I'm a trans man from South Asia. This statement is delivered on the behalf of APTN and was crafted in a collaboration with trans and gender diverse activists from Global South and East. We begin by commending the critical work of the expert documenting violence against our communities globally. The mandate has created a vital space for our voices. We strongly support its renewal. However, we are concerned that the lived realities of trans people in Asia-Pacific remain underrepresented in the report. Our region faces unique and urgent threats that must not be ignored. Majority of countries in Asia-Pacific have limited to no access to legal gender recognition and gender-affirming health services, exposing trans and gender-diverse people to discrimination, violence, physical and mental health risks. In our region, religious leaders, laws and practices have created a climate of systemic harassment and fear for trans people. Extremist mobilization have led to the rollback of legal protection, contributing to the hostile environment that forces men to flee for safety. We urge deeper investigation into how the lack of access to legal gender recognition and gender-affirming care and religious extremism act as the driving forces of displacement for trans people. Lastly, we call the expert to recommend the state in Asia-Pacific to ensure regional asylum and refugee systems which are accessible, inclusive and right-based. Fourthly, displaced trans people must be protected from discrimination and violence, as well as exploitation, economic hardship, social isolation throughout their asylum journey. I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Global Action for Trans Equality.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This statement is delivered on behalf of the Global Action for Trans Equality and was drafted in collaboration with trans and gender diverse activists from the Global South, East and the Caribbean region. We welcome the independent expert's timely report and commend him for exploring the overlooked and urgent issue of forced displacement of LGBTI persons. We especially appreciate the detailed attention to structural, legal and social factors contributing to such displacement, including criminalization, violence, climate change and exclusion from protection systems, and for acknowledging the specific vulnerabilities of trans and gender diverse people. As the report makes clear, discrimination often begins at the home. Many trans and gender diverse people are first displaced by their own families. This rejection is followed by systematic exclusion, homelessness, lack to access of basic health and other living saving services, and violence throughout the displacement journey in destination countries. We urge the Council to pay special attention to the intersection of displacement and climate change. Trans and gender diverse people in small nations and in the Caribbean and the Pacific face a double jeopardy of environmental precarity and state inaction and hostility that further marginalize us. Finally, we welcome the creation of the regional office in the Caribbean and call on the Council to renew the mandate of the independent expert. His work is vital in addressing the unique and often invisible forms of violence and discrimination and other UN mechanisms that may not be captured fully. LGBTI people are citizens too. We are moving from paper to action.
Now I give the floor to Jane Sogi, NPC.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We welcome the report of the independent expert and affirm its central message that the forced displacement of LGBTQI+ people is not incidental, it is systematic. It is the direct result of political scapegoating, criminalization, religiously sanctioned violence, and discriminatory asylum systems. We call on the states to dismantle the legal and ideological structures that criminalize LGBTQI+ people, to stop justifying persecution in the name of family values, and to respect the right to seek asylum in dignity. This means safe, gender-affirming housing, trauma-informed procedures, and access to community-based services. We also cannot speak of forced displacement while remaining silent on the ongoing genocide in Palestine. For decades, Palestinians remain the largest and most protracted displaced population in the world. In Gaza, entire families are being erased intentionally and systematically with the clear intention of ethnically cleansing the territory while impunity prevails. LGBTQI+ people in Palestine are not collateral damage. They are part of families, communities, and resistance. Justice for displaced people must begin with naming root causes, namely colonial apartheid. We call for the urgent and immediate renewal of this mandate, whose work remains indispensable in protecting lives and revealing truths that others refuse to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Rainbow Railroad.
Excellencies, on World Refugee Day, Rainbow Railroad commends the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity for his groundbreaking report on LGBTQI+ persons in forced displacement. With a global network of grassroots organizations, Rainbow Railroad supports LGBTQI+ persons to access pathways to safety. Each year on this day, we publish our annual report, and this year's numbers are staggering. Over 13,000 people reached out for help last year, seeking urgent international protection. Over 80% of these requests came from young people ages 18 to 35. The global anti-gender movement is eroding human rights frameworks and producing increased instances of forced displacement. Anti-asylum sentiment is also growing. Increasingly, states are demonizing refugees and moving backwards on refugee protection and resettlement. For many LGBTQI+ refugees, third country resettlement is life-saving, particularly in transit countries where they are criminalized. Last year, less than 5% of all refugees in need of resettlement actually received it. With coinciding assaults on LGBTQI+ asylum and asylum rights, states must recommit to upholding the fundamental right to claim asylum. We must prioritize those that face systemic discrimination, even within broader protection frameworks. Partnership with LGBTQI+ civil society and establishing dedicated resettlement pathways has demonstrated success in reaching LGBTQI+ refugees and helping them get to safety. We ask state members to commit to international multi-stakeholder coordination.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Madre.
Mr. Vice President, independent expert and distinguished delegates, good afternoon. The Afghanistan LGBTIQ organization ALO welcomes the UN independent expert's timely and vital report. As highlighted, LGBTIQ people face distinct and compounded risks throughout forced displacement, from criminalization and abuse in their countries of origin to violence, legal limbo, and exclusion in transit and host countries. Since the Taliban's return to power, Afghan LGBTIQ people have faced arbitrary detention, sexual violence, public floggings, and other torture amounting to crime against humanity of gender persecution. Those who can flee face pushbacks, deportation, and border violence. Those who reach Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey often do not find safety. We urge the international community to 1. Renew and strengthen the mandate of the UN independent expert on SOGI, whose work remains crucial. 2. Provide dedicated funding and resources to LGBTIQ+ refugee-led organizations to ensure their meaningful participation in decision-making and transitional justice processes. 3. Expand access to humanitarian visas and alternative pathways for LGBTIQ refugees at risk. And 4. Establish emergency resettlement programs for Afghan LGBTIQ asylum seekers at risk in transit countries, particularly LGBTQ women and girls and trans men. Words of solidarity are not enough. Action is overdue. The lives of LGBTIQ refugees and asylum seekers depend on it. I thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Outright Action International.
Mr. Vice President, on behalf of the Forcibly Displaced People Network, we welcome the report and commend the independent experts' leadership. Today is the World Refugee Day. For LGBTIQ forcibly displaced people, the suffering is continuous. We remain excluded from the very system that meant to protect us. This is not just a gap, this is a structural failure that continues to cause harm, where there is no justice, no accountability, no consequences. There is not the... Ask yourself, if the system worked, why refugee-led organizations keep filling up the gaps? Our participation is not an optional. This is the only way forward. Refugee leaders recognized as the first responders, but without power and funding, these recognitions become exploitation. Taking out knowledge while excluding us must end. LGBTIQ RLOs bring lived experience, trusted data, and effective solutions. Our leadership is not symbolic. It's the foundation of effective responses. We urge Council members to renew the independent expert mandate, to review resettlement and complementary and settlement programs that are accessible and safe for LGBTIQ people. Provide long-term, flexible, and direct funding for LGBTIQ refugee-led organizations. Ensure that public funding does not fund anti-rights movement. Thank you.
Thank you. Now a video statement by the Next Century Foundation.
Your Excellencies, my name is Taha Emre Altundağ, speaking on behalf of the Next Century Foundation. We urge the Council to address the critical need for a gender-responsive rebuilding process in the Syrian Arab Republic. As post-conflict recovery slowly progresses, Syrian women and girls continue to face systemic insecurity. They live under the threats of harassment, gender-based violence, and abduction. They are denied consistent access to healthcare, education, and legal protection. These are not the remnants of war, but consequences of deliberate governance decisions that silence and exclude half the population. We call on the Syrian authorities to immediately implement institutional reforms within the Ministries of Health, Education, Justice, and Interior to ensure equal under the law. Specialized Independent mechanisms must be established to investigate and prosecute such crimes, particularly in detention centers and conflict-affected zones. We further call for a minimum quota for women in all levels of government, especially in the formation of the new cabinets and national legislative bodies. Women must not be participants, but equal partners in shaping Syria's democratic and inclusive future. There can be no meaningful peace without justice, and rebuilding Syria without women is not rebuilding at all. Thank you.
Thank you. This was the last speaker we could accommodate for this meeting. Now I give the floor to Mr. Reid for his concluding remarks. You have 6.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and distinguished delegates. I would like to start just by making a couple of comments in terms of the feedback from country reports, and it's really just the broad comment about that it's very encouraging to see the developments that have taken place subsequent to the visit and illustrative of the purpose of such country visits in terms of collaboration and cooperation. In particular, while there were many issues outlined, the one that I would focus on is around bullying in school and education, and indeed that would be the focus of my report to the General Assembly on obstacles to education, because that's such a vital and critical issue. I think that the essence here of what has been discussed and what has been raised by many of the delegations is that discrimination and violence are both drivers of forced displacement and also shape the particular experience of LGBT people in the context of forced displacement. Of course, we are all aware that this is an issue that affects millions of people. By all accounts, some 122 million people currently face forced displacement, and this is focusing very specifically on a particular group. And listening to the various inputs around the room, I'm very struck both by the challenges and the very vivid accounts both of violence and discrimination, but I'm also heartened by the reflections on positive developments from states around the world. And that's something that I take away from this particular gathering. I'm also aware of the distinction between law, policy and social attitude. And I think many of the interventions have highlighted the long-term challenges in terms of changing social attitudes, but law and policy is a very valuable instrument towards that ultimate goal. Now, there have been many questions and little time. I think just to focus on, for example, the drivers of displacement, many delegates have pointed out the kinds of forms of criminalization, the targeted persecution that many LGBT people face, the rise of political rhetoric that demonizes various minorities, including very often LGBT people, and the proliferation of discriminatory laws, particularly those that restrict public expression of identity, the topic of my report last year to this Council. And so in order to tackle the drivers of displacement at the root, it requires that level of legal policy reform and also a change in social attitude and political discourse. Of course, the lack of safety at border crossings. Crossing a border doesn't necessarily guarantee safety. Very often LGBT people flee to countries that also have discriminatory laws in place, and this places particular challenges for LGBT people as they try to find safety. In terms of, there was a specific question around oversight mechanisms. I think here it's important to note that very often LGBT people are reluctant to report abuses, so it's important that whatever oversight mechanism is in place allows for anonymous reporting, that it's independent, and crucially that it retains confidentiality. I think the point has been raised that there are multiple forms of discrimination, and it's very important to have tailored responses that reflect the multiple forms of discrimination that many people face, whether that's based on gender, race, disability, in addition to sexual orientation. Data came up both significantly in the report, but a number of questions. And of course, people have a well-founded fear of disclosing their identity, and so that makes disaggregated data collection challenging. Here, as in many other instances, I think the cooperation with civil society has shown that there are very effective mechanisms in place, and specifically LGBT-led and refugee-led civil society groups and organizations. There were questions also around good practices. Many are detailed in the report. I think about partnerships, again, with civil society organizations proves to be a critical component of those positive examples, and also inclusive access to healthcare and the involvement of informed groups in training of relevant officials. I do just want to focus specifically on the role of civil society organizations, which was one of the questions that was asked. I think it's important to formalize the cooperation with civil society organizations to ensure that they're LGBT-led and refugee-led groups that are involved. They play a vital role in, for example, as I've mentioned, training asylum officials, also in bridging protection gaps. Very often LGBT people may be placed in rural settings, for example, or settings in which there is not much specific tailored support, and civil society organizations, again, play a critical role there. Funding has come up. I think this is a critical issue, is that many LGBT-led organizations face severe funding constraints, and this is becoming all the more challenging and difficult, and they are a vital component of this work. I think there was a question about the role of the UN. I think, that it's been recognized that violence is systemic, and the UN continues to play a critical role in that respect. I'm watching the time. I did just want to focus on the one specific question around Venezuela. I think the reference is to shortages, not the origin of the shortages, and that's an important distinction. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank Mr. Graham Reid for his participation. We will now take a short technical break before beginning the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we will now hold the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants. Let me welcome the mandate holder, Mr. Gihad Mahdi. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. Now I have the honor to give the floor to Mr. Mahdi to present his report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, distinguished delegates. Well, I have 3 reports to present today. First, I will start with my thematic report on missing migrants. The phenomenon of preventable death and disappearance of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers is a tragic and largely underestimated human rights challenge. In my report, I have identified several factors contributing to this phenomenon. These include the lack of adequate and accessible, safe, orderly, and regular migration pathways, due to increasingly restrictive migration policies and a high level of impunity. Lack of access to means of communication to call for assistance in emergencies, and obstacles to the identification and or return of remains of deceased migrants due to the lack of adequate search and forensic identification mechanisms and financial and logistical resources. Migrants may disappear as a result of immigration detention or deportation proceedings, including through agreement with third countries that do not comply with applicable procedural guarantees. Deportations, including deportation flights, carried out under agreement with third countries, increase the risk of migrants being subjected to disappearance. Migrants further disappear, often for a limited period of time as a result of systematic practices of family separation at international borders and in detention and collective expulsion without individual protection assessment. I would like to remind all states that international law prohibits arbitrary or collective expulsion of non-nationals in all circumstances, and that states hold the obligation to conduct a reasonable and objective examination of each person's individual case.